The image on the screen is from the installation called Owl of Minerva, which was my contribution to the Archive of Exile project. And I will begin this talk with Archive of Exile and finish with conspiracy dwellings. The Archive of Exile was a speculative arts and humanities research project that ran from 2009 to 2011, developed by three academics from Sheffield University, Francis Babbage, Jessica DeVoe and Richard Stedman-Jones, paired with three creative practitioners, Eve Beglorian, Hannah Fox and myself. The mission statement for Archive of Exile begins: what might it mean to posit the archive outside the laws, language and legacy of the nation state? What might it mean to conceive of an archive of exile, or reimagine archiving as itself an exilic practice? In reformulating the relationship between mobility and critical creative practice on the one hand, and rethinking the possibilities of the archive on the other, our project opens up alternative possibilities for thinking, remembering, and being out of place. So this portrait is not a self-portrait, but it is me at the age of 2 years, 6 months. And the photograph on the other side is where I lived at that age. It's in Leeds, and the block is now demolished, but it still remains. And I took that photograph in 2010. So every time I go to Leeds, I pass by as I head north to visit my relatives. And it's still there. Anyway, so I think that the ruin, as well as archaeology, seem to have figured pretty closely in line with my practice over the years. And this summer, so I'm going to start with going back in time, because that's where Archive of Exile, or my contribution to it, began. So in the summer of 93, that's 1993, I journeyed to East Europe, looking at a landscape that had recently opened up to Westerners after the collapse of the Soviet Union. This is where my first step is drawn. It is a political and cultural pause, a moment in time that I am unwittingly programmed. Waiting for the bus to take me somewhere, a vehicle of destiny, to Poland, Ukraine and Lithuania. Visiting the realm of family portraits, searching for insights into the life of East European Jews before World War II, in books, in towns and villages, memorial sites and ruins. Recording, video, taking photographs, writing. The experience is emotional, revealing, occurrences that bring me closer to the origins of my ancestors. The lands of East Europe and the Holocaust haunt me. Afterwards, I go through the tapes. Several pieces of work are in the making. The tapes are put away and taken out on occasion for recuts or digitization or some other reason or another. Time passes. The tapes begin to degenerate and dissolve. Then some get taken out of the box and again, and are used in the making of Owl of Minerva. The box is opened again in 2013 to take out the Warsaw Ghetto wall tape of 1996 that contains the rushes of a video interview with Magdalena, a Polish emigre, whose last name I have lost, I'm afraid, who as a child lived through the occupation in Warsaw on the Aryan side. Magdalena spoke of her memories of the ghetto wall, whose last remaining fragments are also captured on High 8, my High 8. Watching the tape again in 2013, it is difficult not to be aware of the controversial Israeli separation barrier and the ever-worsening infringements of human rights and freedom of the Palestinian people in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip. I am reminded how seamlessly forgetfulness obliterates memory, and staggered how forcefully and unconsciously memory is again unleashed. Once more, returning to the Warsaw Ghetto Wall and Magdalena's video, and then to Israel-Palestine, thus triggered, the conflict surfaces a sense of unease, a discomfort that arises, which acts as a warning prior to the beginning of a new piece of work. To face the fear of impending loss, the space that separates and encloses, where the idea of home is always threatened, and where strategies of dissent against racial discrimination, separation and segregation are present across time, across space. We now turn to the parallax edition of Archive of Exile, in which Jessica Dubois lays out a non-territorial reading of a biblical term in her piece, Patience and Other Maps, on the desert and the city, that's her title. To write across philosophy and theology, to disrupt meaning associated with the idea of origin. After 2 world wars, totalitarian regimes, and a continuing tragic turn of displaced peoples, with a camp presented as the biopolitical figure par excellence, the demand for appeasement requires a turning away from the idea of origin and the violence it imposes on others. Jessica takes the old, without a capital letter, Testament narrative of Exodus, which is usually taken as the origin myth of a nation and of national becoming, to displace the reading. She places a concept of time outside the terms of historicist growth, and she claims characterizes the essentially non-territorial priorities of the Judaic tradition. Quote, the space of the middle is, she argues, a topological paradox in which the way out is the way back between liberation and displacement. The idea of origin, like the flowing stream, is never static, always in the process of becoming and disappearing, which for Walter Benjamin needs to be recognized as a process of restoration and re-establishment, but also as something imperfect and incomplete. Jessica follows up by making a call towards the future, not as a verifiable or recoverable event, but rather as a realm marked by a founding inadequacy, a fracture that sustains itself into the present, revitalizing the political radicalism of the Judaic tradition in its capacity to de-link the archival bonds of time and territory. In the late 1930s, Walter Benjamin could no longer believe that historical materialism alone was sufficient to counter German fascism. Richard Bolin argues that Benjamin, in his thesis on the philosophy of history, unleashes the sheer force of the powers of redemptive criticism and reunites that with historical materialism, redeeming now time from the oblivion of forgetting that incessantly threatens them. Okay, so Hotel Minerva lays out fragments of images connecting histories through a collection of still and moving images. I'm now going to talk over a 6-minute clip of Hotel Minerva so you can get the idea of the piece. It's a short clip. 2 histories, one in Hull and Marseille, provide the shape of this project and allude to 2 exilic episodes: the departure and arrival of migrants fleeing the pogroms of the Russian Empire, and the departure and deportation from Marseille of European refugees desperately seeking an exit visa prior to the setting up of Vichy France. Old photographs, images of my grandmother and aunt, and partly degraded high-8 videotapes from my own archive roll across the screen as aging remnant objects, devoid of solidity and permanence in the process of their designated duration on the screen. Shpola, 1993, south of Kiev, Ukraine. Possibly when my maternal great-grandparents were born, a woman runs endlessly for a bus in the town. Then the town's almost deserted marketplace. Hull, 1990. Houses in a local factory are in the process of being demolished in the former immigrant area of Myton, where my grandmother was born. I documented the demolitions with an old OM1 Olympus camera. The images went into the making of the ex-monk of Dora Newman, another piece of work, but way back. Hull, 2010, not much has changed in the Myton area. It's still very much run down. One day soon it will be razed to the ground. Across the road is a side entrance of Paragon Railway Station, where in a semi-derelict state the immigrant platform and waiting rooms still survive. Built to serve the waves of mainly penniless immigrants who arrived from East Europe by ship at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, either to stay or travel onwards over the Pennines to Manchester and Leeds, or to go to New York. In this transitional space, the theme of arrival and departure is used to emphasize upheaval in times of war and uncertainty, and to suggest the constant and ongoing reoccurrence of dislocations and trauma that continues to afflict human populations. Arrivals and departures, docks, ships and trains. Meditations on life and death, pasts and presents. The uniqueness of each individual and the fluctuations and temporary quality of life. From Paris to Marseille. With the imminent German invasion of France, Walter Benjamin and the other German émigrés must flee. Marseille was teeming with people trying to get out, and the last open port in the country. In her partly autobiographical novel, the German writer Anna Seger evocatively describes life in Marseille. For the refugees, it was a place of boredom and discomfort. There was a constant necessity to find a place to put one's head down, a place to eat, a place to sleep, a place to wait. Time would be spent deciphering the mixed messages and promises in a Kafkaesque world of tickets and visas and boats that never arrived. It was a place of whisperers, where the places the refugees found themselves transformed into true Platonic caves, where the interpretation of signs replaces knowledge. In Marseille, Benjamin met Lisa and Hans Fitko, young resistance activists who helped refugees escape into Spain. Hans had first met Benjamin when they were both held captive in Paris at Stade de Cologne, a racing stadium and an internment camp for enemy aliens, following the German bombardments in September 1939. In late September of 1940, Lisa Fitko guided Benjamin and a small group of refugees from Bagnols-sur-Mer over the Pyrenees to the Spanish border town of Port-Bou. That night, fearing deportation back to France, Benjamin committed suicide. This is a clip of the next project that kind of leads on from Owl of Minerva, although it predated it. And it was made with the support of a small AHRC grant that made it possible to locate a network of almost 500 secret meeting places that were active in Germany, in East Germany, from 1980 to 1989, used by informers and the secret police. The Stasi, who we've heard about earlier on, so thank you, Steffen, for that. That's really interesting. During the last decade of the German Democratic Republic, The conspiracy dwellings were dotted all around Erfurt in the city centre. Where's my video? Let's see. Oh, this is what happens, isn't it? Anyway, never mind. I think it's clogged up now. The project was initiated by Joachim Heinrich and myself in 2003 and developed into a long-term cross-disciplinary project. Having suffered at the hands of the Stasi in Erfurt in the 1980s, Heinrich knew what it was like to be labelled as an enemy of the state, and his research into the Stasi in Erfurt was driven by the memory of injustice he had experienced and the desire for ethical transparency. One of the most sensitive and devastating outcomes of the collapse of the GDR was the spate of personal betrayals as citizens accessed their files and discovered who had informed on them, leading to some shocking revelations. The oppressive Stasi regime had returned as an evil force of applied power that showered blame and compliance, guilt and humiliation, after as well as before its demise. I think of how much have I got? 2 minutes. Okay, I think I've got, all right, so I'm going to miss a little bit out. And to link up with that, what I really want to say about this project is that the Stasi files have to be seen as tainted evidence, not only in their capacity to name and shame, but also in their tendency to redefine personal and collective history from the twisted point of view of the Stasi apparatus. And in Erfurt, after this project, we encountered a range of projections of the truth and an unexpected show of force from the ruling political elite. In the 21st century, 2 decades after the collapse of East Germany, the trauma of both past and present again arose, fueled by intimidation and state power. Germany's tendency to demonize the former GDR is in danger of unfairly consigning the lived experience of an entire population to a state of perpetual forgetfulness. It should not be forgotten that many East Germans wanted to reform their country rather than unify with the other Germany. The voice that speaks a discredited past of East Germany wipes out what is credited, what is lived, the bad with the good. Both have their place. As put by Franz Rosenzweig in his book The Star of Redemption, since the state is violent and not merely lawful, it remains at life's heels. This is the meaning of all violence, that it founds new laws. At every moment, the state violently settles the contradiction between preservation and renewal, old and new law. Jessica Dubois in her paper refers to Rosenzweig to suggest that the violence of nations, empires, regimes and ideologies all fall under the martial spell of time coerced into renewal. All are defined by the tautology of foundation, conservation and refoundation. If this is the case, then how can what remains of the history and memory of the former East Germany be coerced into shaping a broader foundation for memory in a way that is not only defined by the Stasi records? Or by renewal, do we mean that which is merely reductive to the ideology of unified Germany? That is to say, to define the entire epoch by the Stasi records as evidence of old law bound within the archive and trapped in place. Thank you.